The Chelsea Hotel in New York City is a place steeped in history and mystery. Known for its eclectic mix of famous residents, from artists and writers to musicians, it has also been the site of numerous dark and tragic events. This story delves into the unsettling and eerie experiences of a guest who stayed there, encountering the lingering presence of one of the hotel's most infamous spirits, Nancy Spungen. With its blend of the supernatural and the macabre, the tale explores the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the lasting impact of a haunted past. As you listen, prepare to be drawn into a world where reality blurs with the spectral, and the whispers of the forgotten echo through time.
The night I checked into the Chelsea Hotel, the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken history. As the front desk clerk handed me the key, a cold draft swept through the lobby, carrying with it a whisper of long-forgotten secrets. I'd heard stories about the place, tales of hauntings and ghostly apparitions, but they felt more like fabrications than reality. Still, as I stepped into the creaky elevator, a sense of foreboding settled in my chest. The ride up was unnaturally slow, each floor marker lighting up with a dim, flickering glow. When the doors finally opened, a chill washed over me, as if I were stepping into another world entirely. Walking down the corridor, the old carpet muffled my footsteps, but there was an undeniable presence, an energy that seemed to cling to the air. The shadows seemed to move on their own, twisting and bending in the dim light. I caught a glimpse of a figure at the end of the hallway, but as I blinked, it disappeared into the wall. My heart raced, and I shook my head, chalking it up to a trick of the light. But deep down, a sense of unease grew, a feeling that something was not quite right. The old hotel seemed alive, as if the walls held onto the echoes of its troubled past. Inside my room, the air felt stifling, thick with an invisible tension. The furniture, a mix of faded opulence and modern attempts at comfort, felt out of place, like relics from different times awkwardly coexisting. As I unpacked, a loud bang from the next room made me jump. My first thought was to dismiss it as old pipes, but then came the faint sound of arguing, muffled yet unmistakable. It felt intrusive, like eavesdropping on a ghostly argument trapped in time. I tried to focus on other things, but the atmosphere was suffocating, the darkness in the corners of the room seeming to deepen with each passing moment. In an attempt to distract myself, I turned on the TV, but the screen flickered with static, refusing to settle on a channel. It was as if the hotel itself was resisting modernity, clinging to its own haunted past. The radiator hissed and clanked, each noise like an echo from the days when the building was new and bustling with life. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. My mind wandered to the infamous ghost stories associated with the Chelsea, particularly the tragic tale of Nancy Spungen, the girlfriend of punk rocker Sid Vicious. The circumstances of her death had always been shrouded in mystery, and some believed her spirit never left the hotel. Restless, I decided to explore the hallways, hoping to shake off the growing sense of dread. The corridors were eerily quiet, the only sound the soft padding of my footsteps. As I passed by a series of old photographs lining the walls, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I noticed a thin layer of frost forming on the frames. It was then I saw her, a woman with platinum blonde hair, dressed in a vintage outfit. She stood in the reflection of a cracked mirror, her eyes staring directly at me. I blinked, and she was gone, leaving only the cold and the ghost of a scream echoing in my ears. I hurried back to my room, the sight of the apparition leaving me shaken. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, but the hotel's reputation made it hard to dismiss. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I found myself frequently glancing over my shoulder. That night, as I lay in bed, the sounds from the next room returned. This time louder, more frantic. It sounded like a struggle, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of someone sobbing. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding, but the noises abruptly stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. The next morning, I decided to confide in a friend about my experiences. Over breakfast, I told her about the ghostly figure and the strange noises. She listened intently, her eyes wide with concern. "You know the stories, right?" she said, her voice low. "About Nancy Spongeon's ghost? People say she still haunts the hotel, especially the room where she died." Her words sent a chill down my spine. We both knew the tale. Nancy, found stabbed in the bathroom. Her death forever linked to the Chelsea's dark history. My friend suggested we investigate, a mixture of curiosity and trepidation in her voice. I hesitated, but the allure of uncovering the truth was too strong. That evening, armed with flashlights and a Ouija board, more for the thrill than any belief in its power, we explored the hotel's lesser-known corners. The deeper we ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. We reached the floor where Nancy had stayed, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken stories. As we approached the infamous room, the door creaked open on its own, revealing an interior shrouded in shadows. We stepped inside, the air colder than the rest of the building. The sense of being unwelcome was palpable, as if we were intruding on sacred ground. We set up the Ouija board on the dusty floor, our hands trembling slightly as we placed them on the planchette. The room felt charged, every sound amplified in the eerie silence. We asked simple questions, expecting nothing, but the planchette began to move, spelling out a chilling message: "Leave." We exchanged nervous glances, unsure if one of us was playing a trick, but the air felt different now, heavy with a presence we couldn't see. Suddenly, the room filled with the sound of a woman's voice, a desperate, angry whispering that seemed to come from all around us. Panicked, we scrambled to leave, the door slamming shut behind us with a force that shook the walls. My friend and I ran down the hallway, our breaths ragged, hearts pounding in our chests. As we reached the elevator, we heard a faint sobbing, echoing through the corridor. We glanced back, catching a glimpse of the blonde woman from the night before. She stood at the far end, her face a mask of sorrow. But this time, her expression twisted into a look of pure terror, and she mouthed something. "Help me." The elevator doors closed, cutting off the haunting image, but her plea echoed in my mind. The next day, determined to understand what we had experienced, I spoke with the hotel staff. They were reluctant to talk, but eventually shared stories of other guests who had reported similar encounters. Some had heard Nancy's ghost crying. Others had seen her wandering the halls. The staff mentioned that the hotel had a long history of unexplained events, adding to its reputation as one of New York's most haunted locations. They spoke of shadowy figures, disembodied voices, and the lingering feeling of being watched. The more they talked, the more the line between reality and the supernatural blurred. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself back in the same hallway, drawn by a force I couldn't explain. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, every shadow seeming to harbor a hidden terror. As I neared the room where Nancy had died, a sudden cold enveloped me, more intense than before. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap I saw her, Nancy Spongeon, or at least a spectral image of her. She stood with her back to me, the air around her shimmering with an unnatural energy. I hesitated, torn between fear and a desperate need for answers. As I stepped closer, a low whispering filled the room, a cacophony of voices blending together. It felt as if the walls themselves were speaking, recounting the tragic events that had unfolded within them. Nancy turned slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. There was a depth of sadness in them, a silent plea for understanding. I wanted to reach out, to communicate, but a sudden gust of icy wind blew through the room, and she vanished. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of despair that seemed to pierce my very soul. I fled the room, the overwhelming sense of being chased by unseen forces driving me back to my own. Back in my room, I tried to make sense of what I had seen. My mind raced, struggling to reconcile the logical with the supernatural. The ghostly image of Nancy Spungen, the chilling whispers, were they real, or just figments of an overactive imagination fueled by the hotel's eerie reputation? The line between reality and the otherworldly had become impossibly thin. As I sat there, lost in thought, the TV flickered on its own, showing nothing but static. Then, through the crackling screen, I heard it, a faint voice, barely discernible, saying, "Help me." The days following my encounters at the Chelsea were a blur of confusion and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that Nancy's ghost was somehow following me. The whispers continued, sometimes loud, sometimes barely there, but always present, like a haunting melody. I found myself jumping at shadows, every creak of the old building sending my heart racing. The stories of other guests and staff, the tales of ghostly sightings and paranormal activity, played over and over in my mind. It felt as though the hotel was alive, feeding off the energy of its troubled history and the fears of those who dared to stay. In a desperate attempt to find peace, I decided to leave the hotel, but something held me back. It was as if the spirits of the place had latched onto me, refusing to let go. On my final night, the air was thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of something waiting to happen. As I packed my bags, a cold wind swept through the room, carrying with it the faint scent of perfume. The lights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I felt an overwhelming urge to go to the window, drawn by an invisible force. Looking out, I saw the city lights stretching out into the night, a stark contrast to the darkness within the hotel. Then, reflected in the glass, I saw her, Nancy Spungen, standing behind me, her expression one of desperate sorrow. She reached out, her hand almost touching mine through the reflection. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness, a deep, aching sorrow that wasn't my own. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone, leaving me with a chilling sense of finality. As I turned away from the window, a knock at the door startled me. It was the night manager looking concerned. He handed me a small package, saying it had been left for me at the front desk. Inside was an old photograph of Nancy Spungen, along with a note that read, "Remember me." My hands shook as I held the picture, the weight of the message sinking in. It felt like a plea, a final attempt to be remembered, to not be forgotten in the annals of the hotel's dark history. The note was unsigned, but the handwriting was familiar, eerily similar to the message on the Ouija board. Leaving the hotel, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The streets of New York were bustling with life, a stark contrast to the haunting quiet of the Chelsea. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers had stopped, but their absence was just as unsettling. It was as if the hotel's ghosts had finally released me, yet a part of me remained tethered to their world. The experience had left an indelible mark, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our reality and the supernatural. As I looked back one last time, the Chelsea Hotel loomed large against the night sky, its windows dark and silent. It was a place where history and the paranormal intertwined, a living monument to the city's haunted past. The stories of Nancy Spungen and the countless others who had walked its halls would continue to echo through time, their voices a permanent part of the building's fabric. I knew that I had experienced something extraordinary, something that defied explanation. And as I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if, someday, I too would become just another story whispered in the dark corridors of the Chelsea Hotel.
As you plan your next visit to Manhattan, remember the chilling tales of the Chelsea Hotel. Have you ever felt a presence you couldn't explain, or heard whispers in the darkness that seemed to call your name? The spirits of this storied building are said to linger, trapped between worlds, seeking recognition and peace. If you dare to explore, tread carefully, or you might find yourself face to face with the paranormal. Share your own ghost stories or thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more haunting tales. Until next time, stay curious and stay brave, because you never know what might be waiting in the shadows.